What if everything you thought you knew about justice was a lie? What if the people sworn to protect you were the ones pulling the strings of corruption? Malik Johnson thought he left his past behind. But when he uncovers the truth about his father's murder, he's thrown into a dangerous game where power, deception, and betrayal run deeper than he ever imagined. Now, the real question is, how far will he go to bring down the system that took everything from him? Before we dive into this gripping story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support is what keeps us bringing you more thrilling content. The road to Brightmoor was lined with old oak trees, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers against the early evening sky. Malik Johnson hadn't set foot in his hometown in nearly 15 years. The last time he was here, he was a teenager, standing in front of a casket, watching as the earth swallowed what was left of his father. Now, he was a grown man, a soldier who had seen war in places far from here. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for the ghosts that still lingered in this place. The house was smaller than he remembered, its faded blue paint peeling at the edges, the porch sagging slightly under the weight of neglect. He ran a hand over the worn wood of the front door before stepping inside. Dust clung to the air, thick and undisturbed. Everything was exactly as it had been when he left, his father's old recliner still positioned in the corner, the faint scent of motor oil and cologne lingering in the walls. Malik had come back for one reason: to turn this house into something more than a tomb. He had saved enough money to open a small boxing gym, a place where kids in the neighborhood could learn to fight with their fists instead of guns. It was what his father would have wanted. As he began clearing out the spare room, he found an old box shoved deep into the back of a closet. Inside were yellowed papers, brittle with age. He almost tossed them aside until he saw the header on one of the documents: Brightmoor Police Department. His father's name was printed neatly below. Frowning, he flipped through the pages. The reports detailed the night his father had been killed. According to the official statement, his father had resisted arrest. A struggle ensued. Officers were forced to use lethal force. Malik knew better. He had been there that night, hiding behind the couch when they burst through the door. His father hadn't resisted. He had been on his knees, hands raised. The gunshots had come too fast. Too many. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. The details in these reports didn't match what he remembered. There were inconsistencies, missing names, and conflicting witness statements. Someone had doctored the files. He needed help. The next morning, Malik made his way to a small cafe on the east side of town. The air smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease. Sitting at the counter, flipping through a worn notebook, was Sasha Nguyen, one of the few investigative journalists still willing to dig into police corruption. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes scanning him cautiously. "You're Malik Johnson," she said, more of a statement than a question. He slid the file across the counter. "I need you to help me find the truth." She hesitated, then picked up the papers. Flipping through them, her brows furrowed. This doesn't add up," she murmured, tapping one of the reports with a chipped fingernail. "The officer's name is redacted. That almost never happens." Malik leaned in. "Someone covered this up. I need to know why." Sasha exhaled, setting the papers down. "This is dangerous, Malik. The people who do things like this, they don't leave loose ends." "I don't care," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not a kid anymore. I'm going to finish what my father never got the chance to." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, I'll see what I can find." That night, as Malik drove back to his father's house, his thoughts churned. He had spent years pushing the past away, but now, it had clawed its way back to him. As he turned onto his street, he noticed a car parked a few houses down. A police cruiser. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. The engine was still running, its headlights dimmed. A figure sat inside, watching. Malik pulled into his driveway but didn't get out. The officer in the car didn't move either. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, the car rolled forward. As it passed, Malik caught a glimpse of the man behind the wheel. Sharp jawline, cold eyes, and the ghost of a smirk. Detective Kane. Malik exhaled through his nose, his pulse steady but alert. They knew he was looking. The morning air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain. Malik stepped outside, stretching his arms, his muscles still tight from the restless night before. Sleep had been scarce since he found those files. He kept replaying the details, trying to make sense of the inconsistencies. If the reports were fabricated, someone had gone to great lengths to bury the truth. And if that someone was still around, they wouldn't appreciate him digging. He decided to start where all good investigations did, with the people who had been there. The neighborhood had changed over the years, but some things remained. The old men still gathered outside the barbershop, rocking in their chairs, swapping stories about the past like currency. Malik approached with measured steps, nodding at the familiar faces. One of them, Harold Lattimore, lifted his gaze. His skin was weathered, his hands rough from years of work. He had been around when Malik was a kid, always sitting on his porch, watching the world unfold. "You're Sam's boy," Harold said, his voice like gravel. "Didn't think I'd see you back here." Malik pulled up a chair. "Didn't think I'd come back either." Harold studied him, his gaze sharp despite his years. "Heard you were asking about what happened that night." Malik nodded. "I found the police reports. They don't match what I remember." Harold exhaled slowly. "That don't surprise me." The others fell silent, listening. Harold leaned forward. "I saw them drag your daddy out of that house. He was already bleeding when they brought him to the car." Malik's stomach tightened. That wasn't in the report. The official version said his father had been shot inside the house after resisting arrest. Harold's gaze darkened. "But you already knew they lied, didn't you?" Malik clenched his jaw. "Yeah, I just need to prove it." Before Harold could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires rolling up against the curb. A black police cruiser. Detective Kane stepped out, his uniform crisp, his stance casual, but there was nothing casual about the way his eyes settled on Malik. Kane smiled, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Johnson, funny running into you here." Malik remained seated. "Something I can help you with, officer?" Kane tilted his head. "You rolled through a stop sign back there. Thought I'd give you a friendly warning." Malik knew the game, a meaningless excuse to remind him who was watching. "That so?" Kane nodded. "Thing is, I hear you've been asking questions about things that don't concern you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "People around here got long memories. But some things are best left in the past." Harold let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Ain't that something? Man's daddy gets killed, and you're telling him it don't concern him." Kane's expression didn't change. He only looked back at Malik. "Drive safe, Mr. Johnson." He walked back to his car, got in, and pulled away, the tension lingering like a storm cloud. Malik turned to Harold. "You think he was involved?" Harold nodded slowly. "Boy, he wasn't just involved. He was the one calling the shots." Later that night, Malik met Sasha in a dimly lit diner. The place smelled like burnt coffee and fried food. She had her laptop open, fingers tapping against the keys. She looked up when he sat down. "I ran a background check on Kane. He was a rookie when your dad was killed. Youngest officer on the scene." Malik exhaled sharply. "And now he's a detective." Sasha nodded. A fast rise for someone with no remarkable cases under his belt. Almost like someone pulled some strings for him. Malik ran a hand over his face. "You think he's still covering for whoever was really responsible?" She hesitated. "I think the entire department might be." Malik leaned back. "And if I keep pushing, they'll come after me." Sasha's voice softened. "They already are." When he left the diner, the wind had picked up. The town felt smaller, its streets pressing in around him. As he reached his car, a strange feeling crawled up his spine. He glanced around, but there was no one. Just shadows stretching under the streetlights. He got in and started the engine. Something felt off. A quiet instinct nagged at him. He reached under his seat on impulse. His fingers brushed against something cold. A phone. Not his. Someone had planted it there. His pulse quickened as he turned it over in his hands. There was no lock screen. No apps. Nothing, except a single incoming call. Unknown number. The phone vibrated once. Then it stopped. Malik exhaled through his nose. Someone was watching. And now, they wanted him to know it. Malik sat across from Darius Cole, watching as his old friend turned the small, unassuming phone over in his hands. They were in Darius' office. A modest space cluttered with case files, legal books, and half-empty coffee cups. The walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings, stories of wrongful convictions overturned, corrupt officials exposed. Darius had built his career on taking on the system, and now, Malik needed his expertise more than ever. Darius sighed, setting the phone down. This isn't just some burner phone. Man, it's a tracking device. Malik leaned forward. Tracking by who? Darius tapped the side of the phone. Law enforcement, or at least someone with access to their tools. The police use these to monitor high-priority suspects. Which means, they think I'm a threat. Malik finished, jaw tightening. Darius nodded. Or they want to make sure you know they're watching. Malik exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. I need to know who planted it. And why. Darius studied him for a moment. Look, man, I know you're after the truth. But if the people responsible for your father's death are still pulling strings, you're walking straight into the fire. Malik met his gaze. Then I guess it's time to see who gets burned first. Later that night, Malik and Sasha sat in her car across from a sleek, high-end bar downtown. Through the tinted windows, they could see Detective Kane nursing a drink at the far end of the bar. He wasn't alone. A man in a sharply tailored suit sat beside him, Captain Julian Mercer, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Brightmoor Police Department. Across from them, a third man, older, with silver-streaked hair, leaned back in his chair. Malik recognized him from news reports. William Carrington, a real estate mogul with deep ties to city politics. Sasha lowered her camera after snapping a few discreet shots. A corrupt cop, a high-ranking official, and a billionaire real estate tycoon walk into a bar. Feels like the setup to a bad joke. Malik kept his eyes on them. Only no one's laughing. Kane glanced around briefly before sliding an envelope across the table. Mercer took it without opening it. The men exchanged a few more words. And then Mercer and Carrington stood up and left. Kane remained behind, finishing his drink. Sasha turned to Malik. That looked like a payoff. Or a message, Malik murmured. They watched Kane for another few minutes before he left, stepping into a black SUV that pulled up at the curb. Sasha tapped her laptop. I'll see if I can dig into Mercer's and Carrington's financials. There's gotta be a money trail somewhere. The next morning, Malik's phone buzzed. It was Sasha. Her voice was tense. I found something. A large amount of money has been flowing from a shell company called Horizon Development into the police department's discretionary fund. Guess who owns Horizon? Malik didn't need to guess. Carrington. Sasha exhaled. And there's more. The biggest recipient of those funds? $13 million went directly to Mayor Sterling's campaign accounts. Malik let the weight of that settle. So we're looking at something way bigger than just Kane. Sasha's voice dropped. This is systemic. Malik, if Carrington's paying off both the cops and the mayor, then whatever they're protecting must be huge. Malik's grip on the phone tightened. Then we keep pushing. He was still thinking about their next move when he pulled up to his house that evening. The moment he stepped out of the car, something felt off. The air was too still. The porch light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the steps. He reached for the door handle and froze. The lock had been forced. Every instinct told him to turn back, to leave, but he stepped inside anyway. The living room was untouched. The kitchen, too, but as he walked down the hall, his stomach clenched. On the far wall, written in thick red paint, were 3 words. Stop before it's too late. The letters dripped like fresh blood. Malik's pulse pounded in his ears. Someone had been here. Someone had walked through his home, unchallenged, and they wanted him to know that they could come back anytime. Malik sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the message on the wall. The red paint had dried overnight, but the words still held the same chilling weight. Whoever had done this hadn't come to steal. They hadn't ransacked his home or taken anything valuable. They had come to send a message. And that meant they knew exactly who he was and what he was looking for. The logical next step was to check his father's files. If someone had broken in, they must have been looking for something specific. He moved quickly, stepping over to the small metal box where he had stashed everything he had found in the house. Old reports, handwritten notes. His father had clearly kept records of something before he died. Malik flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that looked out of place. His pulse quickened when he noticed a gap. One sheet was missing. He had gone through these papers the night before, committing as much as he could to memory, and he was certain there had been a loose sheet tucked between two old police reports. But now, it was gone. His mind raced. Whoever had broken in hadn't just wanted to scare him. They had wanted to erase something. The thought barely had time to settle before a loud knock shattered the silence. He tensed, his instincts from years in the military kicking in immediately. He moved to the window first, peeking through the blinds. A police cruiser sat outside, engine running. Two officers stood on his porch. One of them was Kane. Malik felt a slow burn of anger rise in his chest. He knew better than to trust the system, but he hadn't expected them to come at him this fast. Taking a steadying breath, he made his way to the door. The moment he opened it, Kane's smug expression greeted him. "Morning, Johnson," Kane drawled. "We got a call about a disturbance. Mind if we come in?" Malik kept his face neutral. "There's no disturbance here." Kane's partner, a younger officer with a tense jaw, stepped forward. "We have reason to believe you might be in possession of controlled substances." Malik's stomach turned. He barely had time to process the words before Kane shoved past him. The other officer followed. "Hey," Malik protested, but Kane was already moving through the house, pretending to do a routine search. Then came the moment Malik had been expecting. Kane walked into the living room, held something up between his fingers, and turned back with a satisfied smirk. A small plastic bag filled with white powder. "Well, look at that," Kane said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Seems like we've got a real problem here." Malik exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "That's not mine." Kane stepped closer. "That's not what the evidence says." Before Malik could react, the younger officer was already cuffing him. Minutes later, he was shoved into the back of the squad car. As they pulled away from his house, Kane glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Some advice, Johnson," he said. "Brightmoor's got enough problems without you digging into the past. Maybe it's time you let this one go." Malik didn't reply. He just stared ahead, his hands clenched into fists. At the station, they processed him quickly. Fingerprints, mugshots. It was all routine, like they had done this 100 times before. When they finally brought him into an interrogation room, Kane leaned against the table, folding his arms. "You've got two options," he said, sliding a document across the table. "You sign this, admitting you were in possession of illegal substances, and we cut you a deal. Minor charge, community service. You walk out of here today." Malik glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. "And if I don't?" Kane smirked. "Then we charge you to the fullest extent of the law. You'll sit in a cell until your trial. And in a town like this, you won't win." Malik met his gaze, unflinching. "You really think I'm that easy to break?" Kane's smile faded slightly. He pushed off the table. "Suit yourself." They hauled him out of the room and led him down a long corridor toward holding. Malik's mind was already working through his options. Darius would get him out, but that would take time. He needed more than just a defense. He needed proof that this was a setup. As they reached the cell, Malik barely registered the other occupants at first. Then, a voice cut through the quiet. "Well, I'll be damned." Malik turned. Sitting in the far corner of the cell was a man in his 60s. Salt and pepper beard, eyes sharp despite the years that had worn him down. Elijah Carter, a name Malik hadn't heard in years. A name connected to his father's case. A man who had disappeared without a trace. Malik sat on the cold metal bench, his mind racing. Across from him, Elijah Carter leaned back against the wall, his eyes steady but filled with something deeper. Something that spoke of years spent carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Malik studied the man, searching for the familiar. He had seen pictures of Elijah before, back when he was just a young officer on his father's case. But those were from decades ago. Now, time had worn him down, carving deep lines into his dark skin, streaking his beard with gray. Yet, despite the wear, there was still a sharpness in his gaze. "Elijah Carter," Malik said, more to himself than to the man in front of him. Elijah gave a slow nod. "Been a long time since anyone said my name like that." Malik shifted, his patience wearing thin. What the hell happened to you? Elijah exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. What happened to me? He let out a dry chuckle. Same thing that's about to happen to you if you don't watch yourself. Malik clenched his jaw. You were on my father's case. Then one day, you disappeared, just like that. Why? Elijah's eyes darkened, and for a moment, he looked like he was debating whether to answer. Then, he leaned forward, because I got too close to the truth. The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken for too long. Malik's breath came slow and measured. What truth? Elijah glanced toward the bars of the holding cell, checking to see if anyone was listening. He lowered his voice. Your father wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He found something he wasn't supposed to. Malik's fingers curled into fists. Elijah continued. Brightmoor PD isn't just corrupt. It's controlled. Bought and paid for by people who don't want their business touched. Your father got too close to something bigger than just bad cops. He found out they were running a whole operation, drug trafficking, money laundering, all tied into real estate development. Cops, city officials, business leaders, they're all in on it. Malik's pulse pounded in his ears. And my father? Elijah's face hardened. They made an example out of him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Malik stared at the floor, his father's face flashing in his mind. All these years, he had lived with the pain of loss. But now there was something else. Something darker. Rage. Before Malik could say another word, the sound of a key turning in the lock pulled his attention. A guard stepped into the room. Johnson, you've been posted for bail. Malik rose to his feet, still processing everything Elijah had said. He turned back to the older man. You coming? Elijah gave a small shake of his head. Not yet. Malik hesitated but knew there wasn't time to argue. He followed the guard, his mind still spinning. Outside the precinct, Darius Cole was waiting by his car, his expression tense. Jesus, Malik, he muttered as Malik approached. You barely set foot back in town and you're already on Brightmoor PD's hit list. Malik gave him a pointed look. You think I planned this? Darius sighed. They hit you with a possession charge. Malik, that means someone higher up wants you out of the way. I had to pull every string I had to get you out. Malik leaned against the car, exhaling slowly. It's worse than I thought. My father didn't just get killed by bad cops. He got too close to something big. Darius frowned. What are you talking about? Elijah Carter, Malik said. He was on my father's case. And he just confirmed that the cops, city officials, hell, maybe even the damn mayor, they're all in on something. Drug money. Real estate fraud. They've been covering this up for decades. Darius cursed under his breath. This town never changes. Malik's jaw tightened. That's what I intend to fix. Across town, Sasha Nguyen sat in front of her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The Brightmoor Police Department's internal network was a fortress. Firewalls, encryption, layers upon layers of security. But Sasha was good. Damn good. She had spent hours combing through old case files, looking for anything that connected Malik's father to larger criminal activity. And then, buried deep in classified reports, she found it. A list. Victims whose deaths had been ruled accidental or justifiable homicide. And right there, among the names, was Malik's father. Her stomach turned. She clicked on another file. One labeled, Special Assignments. It was vague, but one name kept appearing. A code name. The broker. Sasha's breath caught. Who the hell was the broker? Before she could dig further, her screen glitched. Lines of code flickered. Then, one by one, her open files started disappearing. No, she muttered, her fingers scrambling to stop it. Then the screen went black. A message popped up. You're in too deep. Walk away. Her pulse pounded. She grabbed her phone and dialed Malik. The moment he answered, she spoke fast. Malik, we have a serious problem. Malik stepped out of the precinct, inhaling the damp evening air. The cold metal of his handcuffs had been removed, but the weight of what had just happened lingered. He had been behind bars for less than a day, but it was long enough to send a message. Brightmoor PD wanted him to stop. Darius was waiting by his car, arms crossed. His suit was slightly wrinkled, the first sign of stress Malik had ever seen on him. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Darius said as Malik approached. Malik shook his head. You did good, D. But this isn't over. Darius exhaled sharply. I had to pull strings, call in favors, and light a fire under some journalists to get you out. The only reason you're standing here is because Kane's bosses decided you're not worth the headache, yet. As if on cue, a police cruiser rolled by. The driver didn't slow down, but Malik could see the man behind the wheel, Kane. He locked eyes with Malik, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smirk. It was a warning. Malik didn't look away until the car disappeared down the street. Darius ran a hand over his face. They want you to know they're watching. Malik's jaw tightened. Good, let him watch. Later that night, Malik sat at a diner across from Elijah. The place was mostly empty, save for a few truckers nursing their coffee at the counter. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a dull glow over the cracked vinyl seats. Elijah stirred his coffee absently. You really want to go all the way with this? Malik leaned forward. You already know the answer to that. Elijah sighed, rubbing a hand over his beard. Then you need to see something. They drove in silence, the city lights fading into the industrial outskirts of Brightmoor. The streets were empty this late, the only movement coming from rats scurrying along the gutters. Malik gripped the wheel, his mind replaying everything Elijah had told him. A drug operation, cops in on it, his father uncovering something he shouldn't have. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. Elijah motioned ahead. Pull in there. Malik turned onto an abandoned lot, weeds poking through the cracked pavement. A rusted warehouse loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered, its walls stained with graffiti. Elijah climbed out first, his steps cautious. This place used to be a hub, he murmured. Drugs, money, bodies, you name it. Cops used it to keep business running smooth. Malik followed him inside. The air was thick with dust and the lingering stench of mildew. The floor was littered with old crates, rotting tarps, and syringes left behind by squatters. Elijah led him deeper, past rusted shelves and broken machinery. Then he stopped at a metal door, its edges lined with deep scratches. He gave Malik a look before pulling it open. Inside was a small room, untouched by time. A table stood in the center, covered in stacks of paper. An old filing cabinet sat in the corner, its drawers slightly ajar. Malik stepped forward, scanning the documents, bank statements, ledgers, transaction logs, all with names tied to the Brightmoor PD. His stomach twisted as he picked up one of the lists. Dozens of names, officers, city officials, business owners, and at the bottom, circled in red, his father's name. Elijah's voice was grim. This is why they killed him. Malik barely heard him. His fingers traced the ink, his father's name staring back at him like a ghost from the past. Then he heard something, a faint sound, a footstep. He barely had time to react before the first gunshot rang out. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Bullets tore through the air, shattering crates, sending papers flying. Malik dove behind a stack of pallets as Elijah returned fire. The men shooting at them weren't cops. They were trained, precise, mercenaries. A round hit the metal cabinet, sparks flying. Malik crouched lower, gripping the pistol Elijah had tossed him earlier. Who the hell are these guys? Malik shouted. Elijah fired 2 more shots before ducking. Private security, probably hired by the broker. Malik cursed under his breath. They had come for the files, for the proof, and they were going to kill to keep it buried. Elijah pointed toward a side exit. We need to move. Malik didn't hesitate. He grabbed as many papers as he could, stuffing them into his jacket before making a break for it. Elijah covered him, laying down fire as they sprinted toward the door. Just as they reached it, another shot rang out. Malik felt the heat of the bullet graze his arm. But he didn't stop. He shoved the door open. Bursting into the night, they ran, feet pounding against the pavement. Behind them, the warehouse glowed with muzzle flashes, the sound of men barking orders filling the air. Malik and Elijah didn't stop running. They had the proof now. But they also had a target on their backs. Gunfire erupted in every direction, the deafening sound bouncing off the rusted metal walls of the warehouse. The mercenaries moved like a well-oiled machine, Their tactics precise. Their shots aimed to kill. Malik crouched behind a stack of crates, gripping his pistol, his breathing controlled but his mind racing. Elijah was on the other side of the room, pinned behind an overturned workbench. He fired off a shot, hitting one of the mercenaries in the shoulder, but it barely slowed them down. "We need to move," Elijah shouted over the gunfire. Malik peeked out, counting the attackers. At least 6, all heavily armed. They had body armor, automatic rifles. This wasn't just a hit squad. This was military grade. One of them barked an order, signaling for 2 men to flank from the right. Malik didn't hesitate. He popped up, squeezed the trigger, and sent a bullet straight into the knee of one of the flanking mercenaries. The man dropped with a pained scream, his rifle clattering to the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. More shots ripped through the air, forcing Malik to duck back behind cover. "This isn't a fight we can win," Elijah growled, reloading. "They're too well equipped." Malik's eyes darted around the room. The only way out was through the emergency exit, but that meant crossing an open stretch with no cover. He gritted his teeth. "We're gonna have to run for it," he said. "On my signal." Elijah nodded, adjusting his grip on his gun. Malik took a deep breath, then popped out from behind cover and fired blindly to keep the mercenaries distracted. Now, they sprinted. Bullets whizzed past them, striking the walls and floor, sending sparks flying. Malik felt the heat of a round graze his shoulder. But he didn't slow down. He reached the door, slammed his shoulder into it, and burst through into the cold night. Elijah was right behind him. But just as he crossed the threshold, a sharp cry escaped his lips. Malik turned, horror gripping his chest. Elijah staggered, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "Keep going," Elijah grunted, but Malik wasn't leaving him behind. He threw Elijah's arm over his shoulder and half carried him down the alley. The mercenaries were still inside the warehouse, regrouping, but they wouldn't have much time. A plan formed in Malik's head as he spotted an old maintenance tunnel a few feet ahead. He dragged Elijah toward it, yanking open the rusted grate and shoving them both inside. The darkness swallowed them whole. They had escaped. For now, Sasha sat in her dimly lit apartment, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The footage from the warehouse's security cameras flickered on her screen. She had hacked into the city's outdated surveillance system minutes ago, and what she found made her blood run cold. One of the mercenaries, a tall man with a military build and a buzz cut, looked eerily familiar. She enlarged the image, running it through a facial recognition program. A match popped up almost instantly. Darren Cole, former Blackridge security operative. Sasha's stomach tightened. Blackridge was a notorious private military company, known for handling dirty jobs under government contracts. But their real business was in the shadows: assassinations, blackmail, and corporate warfare. And they had ties to the broker. Sasha quickly saved the data to a backup drive, knowing that the moment she found this information, someone else probably knew she had it too. She grabbed her phone and dialed Malik. "You're in more danger than you realize," she said the moment he answered. "Yeah," he panted, his voice strained. "Figured that out when bullets started flying." "No, Malik, these guys aren't just hired muscle. They're from Blackridge." There was a pause, then a curse. "That means this goes higher than I thought," he muttered. "Elijah got hit. I need a safe place to get him patched up." Sasha didn't hesitate. "There's a guy, Julian Ross, used to be Brightmoor PD's top forensic doctor before he quit. Now he runs an off-the-books clinic. I'll text you the address." "Appreciate it. And, Malik," she hesitated, "you need to be careful. Kane is moving fast." Malik exhaled sharply. "What now?" "There's an APB out on you. Kane's accusing you of assaulting officers at the warehouse. They're painting you as a fugitive." Malik clenched his jaw. "So now I'm not just running from killers. I'm running from the cops too." "It's worse than that." Sasha's voice dropped. "Darius called me. The FBI just issued a federal warrant for your arrest." The weight of her words sank into Malik's chest like a lead brick. He wasn't just a target anymore. He was officially the most wanted man in Brightmoor. The air in the abandoned parking lot was thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and rusting metal. A flickering street lamp in the distance cast long shadows, barely illuminating the cracked pavement. Malik sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his eyes scanning every dark corner. He didn't like this. Sasha had arranged the meeting with Samuel Briggs, an FBI agent she swore could be trusted. But trust was a luxury Malik couldn't afford. Not now. A set of headlights appeared at the far end of the lot. Malik's muscles tensed as the car rolled to a stop a few yards away. The driver's door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, his trench coat billowing slightly in the wind. Samuel Briggs. Malik had done his homework. Briggs had a reputation. One of the few straight shooters left in federal law enforcement. But if Sasha was right, even the FBI had been compromised. Briggs stopped a few feet away, his hands visible, non-threatening. "You're a hard man to find, Johnson." Malik stepped out cautiously, keeping his distance. "That's by design." Briggs nodded. "I only have 10 minutes before someone notices I'm missing. You asked for my help. So talk." Malik hesitated. The wrong move here could make things worse. But he had no other options. "You've been tracking the broker," Malik said, keeping his voice low. "So have I." Briggs studied him carefully. "You're not the first person to go looking for ghosts, Johnson. And it usually doesn't end well." Malik clenched his jaw. "My father was murdered, and it wasn't random. He found something. Something that got him killed." Briggs sighed, glancing around the empty lot as if weighing the risk of what he was about to say. "Your father was onto something bigger than you realize. We've been trying to take down the broker for years. But every time we get close, the trail goes cold. Informants disappear. Witnesses retract their statements. It's like chasing a shadow." Malik's stomach tightened. "So you've got nothing?" Briggs hesitated. "Not exactly. We know the broker isn't just one man. It's a network, politicians, police, corporate executives. Your father may have stumbled onto something that could expose them. But he never got the chance." Malik took a step closer. "If I can get proof, will you back me up?" Briggs's expression darkened. "You don't get it, do you? There's a mole in the bureau. Every time we get close, they're one step ahead. If you come to me with evidence, there's a good chance it won't make it past my office door before they bury it." Malik exhaled slowly. "So what do you suggest?" Briggs looked around one last time before lowering his voice. "Find out what your father knew. But don't trust anyone, not even me. If we're going to take down the broker, we have to play this smart." Before Malik could respond, the unmistakable sound of screeching tires echoed through the lot. A black SUV came roaring in from the far entrance, headlights blinding. Briggs cursed. "Move." Gunfire erupted as masked men jumped out of the vehicle, rifles raised. Malik dove behind a rusted dumpster as bullets tore through the air. Briggs returned fire, dropping one of the attackers. But there were too many. Malik rolled across the pavement, drawing his own weapon. He fired, hitting another masked figure in the leg, sending him sprawling. But the others kept coming. Briggs ducked behind his car, reloading. "We're compromised." "No kidding." Malik spotted an opening, a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. He shouted to Briggs, "We need to fall back." Briggs nodded, laying down suppressing fire as they made a run for it. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete as they dashed into the shadows. The attackers didn't follow. They weren't trying to kill them. They were sending a message. As Malik and Briggs disappeared into the night, the realization sank in. Someone had known about this meeting before it even happened. The stale scent of gasoline and dust filled the air as Malik and Briggs sprinted between the rusted car frames in the abandoned lot. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets ricocheting off metal and shattering glass. The attackers were relentless, moving with precision, their weapons spewing rounds in short, controlled bursts. These weren't ordinary street thugs. Briggs pressed himself against the side of an overturned sedan, breathing heavily. "They're too well trained," he muttered. "This isn't some local gang." Malik peeked around the car, counting at least 5 shooters moving in formation, their rifles scanning the area. "No, this is professional." He exhaled sharply. "They knew we'd be here." Briggs cursed under his breath. "We've been burned. No time for doubt now." Malik tightened his grip on his weapon and motioned for Briggs to move. They needed an escape route. Fast. Briggs fired 2 shots, forcing the attackers to duck behind cover. Malik used the moment to sprint toward an old metal staircase leading up to a crumbling parking structure. He took the steps 2 at a time, the rust groaning under his weight. Briggs followed, gripping his side as blood seeped through his coat. "You're hit," Malik noted, glancing at the growing stain. Briggs gritted his teeth. "Nothing fatal." A shadow moved below. One of the masked gunmen had broken away from the group. Moving with deadly efficiency, Malik raised his weapon, squeezing the trigger twice. The figure crumpled to the ground, twitching before going still. They kept running, the sound of boots echoing behind them. Briggs stumbled against a rusted pillar, his breathing ragged. The adrenaline was keeping him on his feet. But not for long. Malik crouched beside him. "We need to lose them." Briggs nodded weakly. "I have a safe house, warehouse, 2 miles east. If we make it there, I can get patched up." Malik pulled Briggs's arm over his shoulder and helped him forward, each step a struggle against time. Behind them, one of the attackers coughed, blood bubbling from his lips. Malik hesitated for a brief second, then knelt down. The dying man's fingers clenched into Malik's jacket, his lips moving. "Cobra," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then his hand went limp. Malik stared at the lifeless body, his mind racing. Cobra, a name spoken in hushed whispers in the underground, one of the most notorious assassins in the country. If Cobra was involved, this was bigger than just a cover-up. Briggs pulled at his sleeve. "We need to go." They disappeared into the night. An hour later, they reached the safe house, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Malik kicked the door open, checking every corner before helping Briggs inside. Briggs collapsed onto an old chair, wincing as he pulled his coat off. "I've had worse." Malik ignored him, searching the room. It was sparsely furnished, but a metal filing cabinet sat in the corner, covered in dust. Briggs gestured toward it. "Everything I have on the broker is in there." Malik pulled open a drawer, scanning the documents. Offshore accounts, shell companies, political donations that didn't add up. Then he saw it. A bank transfer. Millions of dollars moving through a network of fake corporations, all leading back to one name. His stomach tightened. "Sterling," he whispered. Briggs nodded grimly. "Mayor Sterling isn't just corrupt. He's part of the system that keeps the broker in power." Malik exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about his father anymore. It was the whole city. His burner phone vibrated. A text from Sasha. "Got something big. Call me now." Malik dialed. Sasha answered immediately. "The money trail you asked me to follow? It's bigger than we thought. I found." A sudden crash outside cut her off. Malik turned. The distant sound of sirens. Briggs sat up, suddenly alert. "They found us." Through the dirty warehouse windows, red and blue lights painted the night sky. The safe house was surrounded. Malik clenched his jaw. Someone had betrayed them. Briggs slowly reached for his gun. "Only one way they knew we'd be here." The warehouse doors burst open. Armed officers flooded inside, weapons drawn. And leading them, Agent Carter. Briggs's breath caught. Damn it. Malik didn't move, his pulse hammering. FBI, but not the good kind. Carter smirked. "Going somewhere, gentlemen?" The foul stench of damp concrete and rotting debris filled the narrow tunnel as Malik and Briggs trudged through knee-high water. The echo of their splashes mixed with distant sirens above, reminding them that time was running out. Briggs clutched his wounded side, his breath shallow. How much further? Malik glanced at the dimly lit tunnel ahead. "Another 2 blocks. Elijah's guiding us through the traffic cams." A voice crackled through Malik's earpiece. "Keep moving," Elijah instructed, his tone tense. "There's a checkpoint set up on the street above you. They're expecting you to resurface." Malik exhaled sharply. "Then we don't surface." Briggs grunted as he pushed forward. "We keep going deeper. We might not come back up. Better that than a bullet to the head." They pressed on. Above them, the muffled sounds of sirens and barking police dogs hinted at the relentless pursuit. The city wanted Malik Johnson in chains, or in a body bag. Suddenly, Elijah's voice broke in again. "Stop. There's movement up ahead." Malik stilled. He motioned for Briggs to lean against the wall as he scanned the darkness. A faint splash echoed from further down. Someone was waiting. He flicked the safety off his gun. "We're not alone." Briggs lifted his weapon with a wince. Tell me something I don't know. A shadow moved. Malik fired a warning shot, the sound bouncing through the tunnel like a thunderclap. Then, silence. A flashlight flicked on from the darkness, and a voice called out, hoarse and weary, "Don't shoot, it's just me." A ragged-looking man stepped into the dim light. His clothes were soaked, his beard unkempt. A street survivor, hiding like them. Malik kept his gun trained. "Who the hell are you?" The man raised his hands. "Just trying to stay alive. Same as you." He eyed Briggs, noticing the wound. "That cop's not gonna make it far unless you get him some real help." Malik exchanged a glance with Briggs. The stranger wasn't wrong. Before Malik could respond, Elijah's voice crackled again. "I found a safe house. 2 blocks west of your exit point. It's an abandoned mechanics shop. Get there fast. Sasha just found something." Malik didn't hesitate. "We move now." They left the man behind and kept going, pushing through the darkness. Meanwhile, in a cramped apartment miles away, Sasha's fingers flew over her keyboard. Her monitors flashed with endless streams of numbers and encrypted files. She had finally cracked it. A bank transfer of $10 million, wired from an offshore account linked to the broker. The recipient? Richard Langston. Sasha's stomach churned. Langston wasn't just another corrupt politician. He was the face of reform. The man who had promised to clean up Brightmoor's police force. And now, he was the one ensuring its corruption thrived. She grabbed her phone and dialed Malik. "Pick up, damn it," she muttered. The line clicked. "Talk to me." Malik's voice came through, breathless. "You need to hear this," Sasha said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Langston is the one protecting the broker. He's been funneling money through offshore accounts and using the police as his personal enforcers." Malik's silence on the other end was deafening. "You still with me?" she asked. "Yeah," Malik said, his voice tight. "I'm done running. We take him down." Sasha hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" She swallowed hard. "There's a file buried deep in Langston's system. It details a hit list. Everyone connected to the case. Everyone who knows too much." Malik's pulse quickened. "Who's on it?" Sasha pulled up the file. The list was long, but one name stood out. Elijah Parker. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's next." The steady hum of a coffee machine, the soft clinking of ceramic cups, and the occasional laugh from patrons filled the small cafe on the corner of Maple Street. It was a quiet morning, too quiet for a city drowning in corruption. Elijah Parker stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring at the faded newspaper in front of him. His name wasn't in the headlines, but he knew he was running out of time. The past had a way of catching up, and Brightmoor was a city that never let its ghosts rest. A few tables away, Malik entered, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Elijah and moved in quickly. "We need to go, now," Malik muttered, his voice tight. Elijah barely had time to react before Malik pulled him to his feet. "What the hell?" Elijah started. "No time." Malik cut him off, already leading him toward the back exit. At that moment, the low rumble of an approaching engine caught Malik's attention. Through the large cafe windows, a black truck skidded to a stop in front of the building. The doors flew open, and 2 men in dark tactical gear stepped out, rifles raised. "Move," Malik shouted. The first shot shattered the front window. Glass rained down as the cafe erupted into chaos. Customers screamed, diving under tables, while the barista hit the floor behind the counter. Briggs, stationed outside in a nearby car, saw the ambush unfold and didn't hesitate. He pulled his weapon and fired through the windshield, hitting one of the gunmen in the shoulder. The man spun, firing wildly in response, sending bullets tearing through tables and chairs. Malik shoved Elijah through the back door into the alley. They ran, their boots slamming against wet pavement. But their escape was cut short. A figure stepped into their path. Cobra. He was dressed in black from head to toe, a pistol hanging loosely in his grip as if he had all the time in the world. His smirk was almost amused. "You really think you're winning?" Cobra tilted his head, his voice dripping with mockery. "This isn't about cops or politicians. You're still playing checkers while the rest of us are moving chess pieces." Malik clenched his fists. He knew Cobra wasn't here just to talk. Without warning, Cobra lunged. Malik barely dodged the first strike. Cobra was fast, Precise. A fighter trained for the kill. Malik countered with a sharp elbow to Cobra's ribs. But the assassin absorbed the hit, twisting to bring a knife into play. Elijah stumbled back, watching the two men clash in brutal efficiency. Malik ducked a slash, driving a knee into Cobra's stomach before throwing him against the alley wall. For a moment, it seemed like Malik had the upper hand. But then, Cobra smirked again. "You forgot one thing," Cobra panted. He reached into his pocket and pressed a small detonator. Malik's stomach dropped. A deafening explosion ripped through the cafe. Flames shot into the sky, shattering windows and sending debris flying into the alley. The blast knocked Malik and Elijah off their feet. The sound was deafening, the heat scorching. Malik rolled over, coughing, ears ringing. He scrambled to his feet, eyes searching desperately. Elijah. Through the thick smoke, a figure emerged. Briggs, bleeding from his forehead, dragged Elijah out of the rubble. Both men were battered, barely standing, but alive. Cobra was gone. But near the alley's exit, a single phone lay on the ground. Its screen lit up with a single message. "Langston wants to meet you." The city skyline glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the mayor's office. Brightmoor's streets stretched below, cars and people moving as if the world was still ordinary, as if corruption wasn't rooted deep in every corner. Malik stood at the entrance, his jaw tight, every muscle in his body on edge. He had been in war zones, faced enemies far deadlier than politicians in tailored suits. Yet, standing here, he felt the weight of something far more dangerous: power without consequence. Mayor Richard Langston sat behind a polished oak desk, perfectly at ease. His tailored gray suit was crisp, his tie immaculate. A half-empty glass of bourbon rested near his hand, and a cigar smoldered in a crystal ashtray. He didn't rise, didn't motion for Malik to sit. Instead, he simply smiled, the kind of smile men in his position used when they already knew the outcome of a conversation. "You've caused quite a mess," Langston said, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "I have to admit, I underestimated you." Malik didn't respond. He kept his breathing steady, his fists unclenched, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room. 2 security guards near the door, another by the window, all armed. Langston gestured toward the city lights behind him. "Brightmoor is my city. I built this. You, on the other hand, are just a ghost of a man trying to fight something bigger than yourself." He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "So, let's get to the point. You walk away. You leave Brightmoor. Leave this ridiculous crusade behind. And in return, I let your friends live." Malik didn't flinch, but inside, rage coiled like a spring. "You think I believe that?" His voice was low, controlled. "You don't let people live, Langston. You bury them." Langston exhaled a laugh. "You're smarter than you look. But let's be honest, Malik. You're out of time." With a smooth motion, he reached for a remote control and pressed a button. The massive screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. Malik's breath caught. The grainy security feed showed a small, dimly lit living room. A woman sat in a chair, her hands tied behind her back. Her face, tired, lined with age but filled with strength, was one Malik knew better than his own. His mother, standing behind her, his face twisted into a smirk, was Cobra. Langston took another sip of bourbon, watching Malik's reaction closely. "You still think this is about evidence? About justice?" He shook his head, sighing. "This is about power, and I hold all of it." Malik's fists clenched. His mother didn't move, didn't scream, but he saw it in her eyes. The same strength his father had, the same defiance. Langston leaned forward, voice calm, almost soothing. "You don't have to lose her. You don't have to lose anyone else. All you have to do is let it go. Leave Brightmoor. Disappear." For the first time, Malik felt a sliver of doubt. He had fought his entire life against impossible odds. But this was something else. He could feel the weight of the decision crushing him. Then, movement. Across the room, Briggs, standing near one of Langston's bookshelves, adjusted his wrist ever so slightly. A tiny red light flickered against the inside of his sleeve. A recording device. The entire conversation was being captured. Langston's arrogance had made him careless. He believed himself untouchable, that Malik had no choice but to surrender. But if they could get out of this room alive, they had everything they needed to take him down. Malik forced himself to breathe, to think. Langston noticed the hesitation and smiled. So, what will it be? Your mother? Or this pointless war? Malik looked up, his expression unreadable. He had his answer. The car sped down the darkened highway, its headlights slicing through the dense fog hanging over the outskirts of Brightmoor. Malik gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his jaw set, his mind racing. Sasha sat in the passenger seat, scanning a tablet, while Briggs, pale and sweating from his previous injuries, sat in the back, clutching his side. We've got one shot at this, Sasha murmured, eyes fixed on the blinking red dot moving slowly across the map. That house is heavily reinforced. If Cobra's expecting us, we're walking into a death trap. Malik didn't blink. He's always expecting us. Briggs let out a shaky breath. Then let's make sure he doesn't walk out of there. The abandoned house loomed ahead, sitting in the middle of an overgrown lot. The wooden structure sagged under years of decay. Windows boarded up, the front door slightly ajar like a predator's waiting mouth. The only sign of life was the faint glow of a single light from within. Malik killed the engine and reached for his sidearm. Sasha checked the extra clips, nodding once before slipping into the darkness. Briggs, despite the wound slowing him down, followed. They moved in silence, slipping through the tall grass. Malik signaled, then pushed open the back door. The interior smelled of damp wood and cigarette smoke. A single chair sat in the middle of the living room, and in it, his mother. Her face was bruised, her hands bound tightly behind her. Blood trickled from a gash on her temple. But her eyes, those sharp, unbreakable eyes, locked onto Malik the second he entered. No fear, just recognition. Then, the gunfire started. Bullets tore through the walls as Cobra's men opened fire from the second floor. Malik threw himself over a dusty couch, firing back in short, controlled bursts. Sasha ducked behind an overturned table, taking out a shooter on the staircase. Briggs wasn't so lucky. A bullet slammed into his shoulder, knocking him back into the hallway. Sasha screamed his name, scrambling to reach him as more rounds rained down. Malik had no time to think. He had to end this. He sprinted toward the stairs, dodging splinters of wood as bullets cracked through the railings. Cobra emerged from the shadows, a knife in one hand, a pistol in the other. You should have walked away, Johnson, he sneered. Malik didn't waste words. He lunged, catching Cobra off guard, sending the gun skidding across the floor. The two men crashed into the wall, grappling for dominance. Cobra was fast, too fast, but Malik was stronger. He drove a knee into Cobra's ribs, then landed a solid punch to his jaw. Cobra staggered but recovered, pulling the knife in a deadly arc. Malik barely dodged, feeling the blade graze his ribs. The pain flared, but he shoved it aside. Then, movement. From the corner of his eye, Malik saw it, his mother, bound but determined, kicking at something near her feet. A pistol. She gave it one last push, sending it sliding toward him. Malik dove, grabbed it, and turned in one motion. Cobra lunged. One shot. The knife clattered to the floor. Cobra staggered back, blinking, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He stumbled, then collapsed against the wall. Malik stood over him, breathing hard, his hands trembling. Cobra coughed, a slow smirk curling his lips. You think I'm the big fish? His voice was weak, but his amusement remained. Then, his phone vibrated in his pocket. Malik reached down, flipping the screen toward him. A single message from an unknown number. He doesn't matter. Eliminate Langston. The city of Brightmoor was a storm of noise, tension, and outrage. Streets flooded with protesters chanting slogans, their voices echoing through the buildings like a battle cry. Sasha had done her job well, within hours of releasing the incriminating audio. Every major news outlet had picked it up. Headlines screamed of corruption at the highest level. And now, the entire city demanded justice. Inside a dimly lit apartment, Malik stood near the window, watching the chaos unfold below. His mother sat on the couch, bandages wrapped around her arms, sipping tea in silence. Briggs, despite his injuries, leaned against the wall, his sharp eyes scanning the television screen where reporters dissected every detail of Langston's crimes. "He's running out of options," Sasha said from behind her laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. "The governor's office just issued a statement. If Langston isn't arrested soon, they'll be forced to intervene." Malik barely heard her. His mind was fixed on one thing. Langston was still out there. And desperate men made dangerous choices. Then, the phone rang. Elijah's voice was strained but clear. "It's happening now. FBI got the green light. They're moving in on Langston's convoy." Malik didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and strode toward the door. "Where?" "Downtown. He's trying to flee in an armored vehicle." Malik exchanged a look with Briggs, who pushed himself off the wall despite the pain. "Let's end this." Langston's convoy tore through the city at reckless speed, escorted by a fleet of black SUVs. Inside the main vehicle, the disgraced mayor sat between two armed men, his face drenched in sweat as he gripped his phone. "You listen to me," he growled into the receiver. "I want a way out. Now. I don't care how much it costs." The voice on the other end was calm. "There is no way out. Richard." Langston's face twisted in rage. "I know who you are. I know what you're trying to do. But I won't go down alone." Silence. Then, a single word. "Goodbye." The call ended. A split second later, the sound of screeching tires and sirens erupted around them. From all directions, FBI tactical units swarmed, blocking the road ahead. Helicopters roared above as heavily armed agents poured out, taking position. The SUVs skidded to a halt, the men inside drawing their weapons. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them," a booming voice commanded through a loudspeaker. Langston's breathing grew rapid. He turned to his guards. "Do something." Before they could react, the lead SUV's doors burst open. A team of FBI agents advanced with precision, their rifles aimed. Elijah stepped forward, his badge glinting under the flashing lights. "Richard Langston," he called out. "It's over." Langston clenched his fists. He had spent his entire career playing the game, bending the rules in his favor. Now, in front of the entire city, there was no escape. Slowly, he stepped out of the vehicle. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Reporters shoved forward, cameras flashing. Langston turned his head, his face twisting with fury as he shouted, "You don't get it. You think this ends with me? We're just pieces on the board. There's someone else pulling the strings." His words sent ripples of unease through the crowd. And then, unnoticed by most, a sleek black sedan slipped away from the scene, its tinted windows shielding the occupant inside. A figure sat in the back seat, calm, watching everything unfold. Malik stood outside his apartment later that night, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. Brightmoor was still in chaos, but Langston was in custody. It should have felt like victory. But something didn't sit right. A faint rustling sound snapped him from his thoughts. He turned toward the mailbox, where a plain envelope had been slid through the slot. Frowning, he picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. His father, standing next to another man. A man Malik recognized instantly. His blood ran cold. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Malik sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the photograph in his hands. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded, but the image itself was clear. His father stood in the center, smiling. A familiar expression Malik had nearly forgotten. But it wasn't just his father that caught his attention. Next to him was a man Malik had never seen before. Older, taller, with piercing eyes and a rigid posture. And on the lapel of his dark suit, a badge gleamed in the dim light. Not a standard police badge. Something else. A symbol Malik recognized but couldn't immediately place. His fingers tightened around the photograph as he turned to Sasha, who sat across from him. Laptop open, scanning through databases. "Anything?" he asked. She exhaled sharply, fingers tapping the table in frustration. "The guy in the picture. His name is Richard Calloway. He was the chief of police in Brightmoor before disappearing 20 years ago. No records of his death. No official resignation. He just vanished." Malik's jaw tensed. Why would my father be standing next to a police chief who disappeared without a trace? Sasha shook her head. "I don't know. But that badge he's wearing, it's not from Brightmoor PD. It belongs to an old intelligence unit that was supposedly shut down decades ago. Shadow Ops. Off-the-books investigations. If your father was connected to that, then this goes deeper than we thought. Malik leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. His entire life, he had believed his father was just an honest man caught in the crossfire of corruption. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if his father had known something? What if he had been part of something? Across the room, his mother watched him with tired eyes. She had been quiet since the chaos of the past few days. But now, she finally spoke. "Malik, let it go." Her voice was firm but pleading. "Langston is in prison. The people who hurt your father, they're either dead or behind bars. It's over." Malik looked at her, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He knew she was afraid. She had already lost her husband. She didn't want to lose her son too. But this wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. "Mom," he said softly, "if I stop now, then what? How many more Langstons are out there? How many more families like ours have been torn apart without ever knowing why?" She sighed, shaking her head. "Just promise me one thing. Whatever you do, don't lose yourself in this." Malik reached out and squeezed her hand. "I promise." His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "If you really want the truth about your father, meet me, 10 p.m. Abandoned industrial park." Sasha peered over his shoulder. "It's a trap." "Probably," Malik admitted, "but I have to go." She frowned. "Then you're not going alone." Malik gave her a small, knowing smile. He had expected nothing less. Malik parked his car a few blocks away from the abandoned industrial site. Stepping out into the cold night air, the streets were empty, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. He adjusted the gun holstered at his hip, the weight of it grounding him, and slipped a small recording device into the inner pocket of his jacket. He had come alone, just as instructed, but that didn't mean he was unprepared. As he approached the meeting point, the faint sound of footsteps echoed against the steel and concrete. A figure emerged from the shadows, an older man, his silver hair barely visible under the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. His posture was rigid, controlled, but there was something in his eyes that Malik recognized immediately. A man who had seen too much. A man who had survived. Richard Calloway. Malik tightened his fists. "You've been dead for 20 years. Calloway exhaled slowly, nodding. "That's what they wanted you to believe." Malik didn't move. He had spent his entire life chasing ghosts. And now, one of them was standing right in front of him. "You knew my father." Calloway's expression darkened. "I didn't just know him. I fought beside him. And I failed him." For a moment, the night seemed to stretch on forever. Calloway took a cautious step forward. "Your father and I were part of something bigger than either of us realized. A covert task force within the department, created to root out corruption from the inside. We thought we were making a difference. But we underestimated how deep the rot went. Langston was just a face. The real power, it was above him, controlling him. And when your father got too close, they made an example out of him." Malik's breath felt heavy in his chest. "So you ran." Calloway's jaw tightened. "I had no choice. If I had stayed, I would have been next. I wanted to fight, but I was outnumbered, outplayed. Disappearing was the only way to survive. But you," he hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You did what none of us could. You brought them down." Malik stared at the older man, searching for any sign of deception. "Then why are you here now?" Calloway reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Because it's not over." Malik took the file hesitantly, flipping it open. Inside were pages upon pages of names, transaction logs, internal memos, evidence of something much bigger than Langston. They let Langston fall because he was disposable. Calloway continued, "But the machine? It's still running. And if you don't stop it, someone else will take his place." Malik clenched his teeth. He had spent so long believing that taking Langston down would bring him peace, that the cycle of corruption and violence would finally end. But now, looking at the names in the file, he knew the truth. This fight was far from over. Calloway studied him closely. "You have a choice, Malik. Walk away now, take the win, and live your life. Or keep going, knowing that what comes next will be even more dangerous than before." Malik didn't answer right away. He thought about his mother, still recovering from the trauma of nearly losing him. He thought about Sasha, Elijah, Briggs, people who had risked everything to help him. But most of all, he thought about his father. Malik shut the file and exhaled. "I've made my choice." Calloway gave him a slow nod, as if he had been expecting that answer. "Then we have work to do." From the rooftop of a nearby building, a man in a tailored suit watched through binoculars, his phone pressed to his ear. "He's made his choice," the voice on the other end confirmed. The man lowered the binoculars, a faint smirk forming on his lips. "Prepare for action. Justice isn't just about winning a battle, it's about the fight that never ends." Malik Johnson uncovered the truth, but in doing so, he stepped into an even bigger war, one where power never willingly surrenders. His story reminds us that corruption thrives in the shadows, but so does resistance. The question is, how far would you go for the truth? If you enjoyed this story, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Malik made the right choice? And what would you have done in his place? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Covert Truths so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden battles for justice. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next story.